Hello, this is Dr. Eric Bricker, and thank you for watching AHealthcareZ. Today's topic is principal agent problem in healthcare. Now, this is a basic problem that exists in economics and in politics that we have to understand because it is so readily present in healthcare as well. Now, it was first described in 1976, so this idea has actually not been around for that long, and it says that an agent is delegated authority and control by a principal. But the problem is that the agent of that principal does not act in the best interest of that principal. So you could think about a person who's like stockbroker is not acting in their best interest. In that case, the principal is the person, is the investor, and the agent is the stockbroker who's not doing the thing he's supposed to be doing for his customer. Okay, so in healthcare, the principal of, let's say, a self-funded plan, which is 60% of plan members in America, the principal is the plan members, right? The plan exists for the plan members, okay? And let's say the agent is, okay, the plan sponsor, whether it be HR or ultimately the company, the CEO, the CFO. Okay, so the plan sponsor is supposed to be acting in the best interest of the plan member. Okay, but there's an additional level of principal agent in that oftentimes the plan sponsors use a broker or a consultant, and they delegate a lot of responsibility and authority to them. And then that broker consultant, they themselves are a principal that then delegates authority and control to an agent. They delegate it to the health insurance carrier. And that health insurance carrier, they even have that same problem too, because they, as the principal, they delegate a certain degree of authority of taking care of their plan members to the agent, being the healthcare system or the hospital system. So now, specifically, let's talk about one example, and that is the example of FWA, fraud, waste, and abuse. If you're a plan member, you don't want your plan's asset, the money, to be spent on fraud or waste or abuse. Like, you would want that to be zero. Now, the agent, the plan sponsor, is not necessarily going to want to expose fraud, waste, and abuse. Now let's talk about why that is. So why do these principal agent problems exist? There's typically two reasons, and these original economists back in the 70s, they identified it. One is that the agent has more information, and two, they have a conflict of interest, specifically as it relates to the exposure and reduction of fraud, waste, and abuse. The conflict of interest for the plan sponsor is okay, well, they oversaw previous fraud, waste, and abuse. So here they are guilty of letting this happen in the past, either because of negligence or incompetence, or maybe for some reason it was beneficial to them to actually let this fraud, waste, and abuse happen. So for example, the plan sponsor, the person in HR or benefits might want to endear themselves to the broker consultant because maybe they actually want a job at the brokerage or the consultant. And certainly we see lots of HR and benefits people work at brokers and consultants. Okay, so there's a conflict of interest. Likewise, the broker and consultant is turned to the insurance carrier. The insurance carrier would not want to be forthcoming about fraud, waste, and abuse because then the broker consultant would have to go back to the plan sponsor and fire them. So they would get fired. And the insurance carrier ultimately would not want to go to the healthcare system and expose fraud, waste, and abuse because it's like, okay, well, they're in network, right? And that fraud could be like claims for people that never happened or upcoding for claims that was grossly egregious for the services that were actually rendered. And the insurance carrier would have to be like, look, there's like no way we could have you in our network because it's like fraudulent activity that you're. So they'd have to fire them. So the conflict of interest for exposing fraud, waste, and abuse is that if the plan members got what they wanted and they exposed all the fraud, waste, and abuse, then essentially the plan sponsor would have to be fired, the broker consultant would have to be fired, the insurance carrier would have to be fired, and ultimately maybe the health system would have to be kicked out of the network, which is why there is this principal agent problem just for fraud, waste, and abuse. And you could replace this with PBM, et cetera, et cetera. Now, what are some solutions? Well, one of the solutions is competition. So obviously, there's competition of brokers for plan sponsors. They can do RFP, and they can say, hey, look, broker, if you're not exposing fraud, waste, and abuse appropriately, then we'll go out and we can have competing brokers come in and talk about how they do a much better job of exposing fraud, waste, and abuse than this particular broker. Likewise, insurance carriers can go to brokers and to plan sponsors and be like, look, we've got a claims processing system. This is actually what TPAs do when they go up against the major insurance carriers, is they say, look, we don't auto-adjudicate claims less than $10,000. We won't auto-adjudicate claims down to like $500 or $1,000. So in other words, we'll have a much finer tooth comb when we're going through the claims to prevent the fraud, waste, and abuse. So there's competition there, right? You could fire your carrier and hire a TPA instead. Now, interestingly, probably the area that has the least amount of competition is right here between the plan sponsor and the members. The employees and their family members. Are the employees and their family members going to fire the HR benefits CEO, CFO? Probably not. So the biggest breakdown in competition as a check on the principal agent problem within health insurance and healthcare is probably right here between the plan sponsor and the plan members, okay? Okay, but there's other solutions as well. And oh, by the way, this comes from a Yale political science lecture that is on YouTube, and I will leave a link in the show notes, and they talk about these solutions at approximately hour 1 and 6 minutes, so you can look specifically at that video. It's fantastic. Next. Is to align the interest better. Okay, well, if you can't fire the plan sponsor, how could you better align their interest? Well, you could, this is an idea, I'm not saying it's the best idea. You could actually have variable comp for the plan sponsor. You could say, hey, plan sponsor, for every $1 of fraud, waste, and abuse that you identify, you get to keep 20 cents of it. Okay, so you could actually have their compensation package or maybe their annual review, et cetera, be more consistent with what the plan members would want. Okay, next. You could also have outside monitoring is the third solution to this. So here, it's like, well, maybe the plan members, maybe the plan itself needs to have an independent third-party auditor, like equivalent to like the way companies have outside accounting firms audit their books when they have to, report them to the stock market, to the public markets. And, maybe there needs to be like a Deloitte or an EY of the plan sponsor world to audit those, so that they're like the plan police saying, okay, well, we're going to go in and on behalf of the plan members, we're going to audit fraud, waste, and abuse. And maybe the comp for the plan police is like they get to keep 20% of what they identify. Okay, so none of these ideas are perfect, but I want to say that, or maybe what you do is that the plan sponsor, that head of benefits, head of HR, maybe their job needs to be on the line on an annual basis, right? Who knows? But that's not how it exists in the world today. But a good proxy specifically for this, and this conflict of interest goes away when you have a new head of HR, CFO, even CEO here in the plan sponsor position, because then that conflict of interest of exposing their own prior lack of oversight of the fraud, waste, and abuse goes away. And that's exactly what happened at Quest Diagnostics. I'll leave a link in the show notes to the Quest Diagnostics case study. Quest did this fantastic job of re-engineering their health plan, including reducing fraud, waste, and abuse that kept their trend flat or negative over the course of 3 years, where it had been going up so much previously. But the key there is that Quest got a new CEO, who then brought in a new CFO, who then brought in a new chief medical officer to run the health plan, and they took it out of the hands of HR. And that's rather extreme, that's rather drastic. But if you're looking for ways to solve this principal agent problem, specifically at the employer level, then one place that you might want to look is when there is a new person or group of people sitting here, because that will help eliminate the conflict of interest that will inherently stymie other activities for reduction in fraud, waste, and abuse. And that's my point for today. Thank you for watching AHealthcareZ.